Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I'm here to welcome our viewers from all over the world, including those of you who are watching us on the portable TV app. So something has happened tonight that seems to almost piggyback. This is interesting, off of comments that have been made by those who are critical of the US's military exercises in Taiwan and, of course, in the South China Sea. It's been an ongoing story, right? So what has often been asked, rhetorically, of course, is how would we like it here in the United States if tomorrow, for example, suddenly the Chinese military showed up off the coast of the United States to do military exercises or close-up reconnaissance operations? Interesting question, right? Well, I say that because tonight, interestingly enough, it appears the question is no longer rhetorical. The Global Times, which is essentially a mouthpiece for the Chinese government, is actually calling for just that. This is an editorial that seems to be written as a threat that says, and let me quote it for you, the U.S. will definitely see the PLA, the People's Army, essentially, show up at its doorstep in the not too distant future. This editorial, which once again was likely published with the consent of Beijing, accuses the United States of naked provocation, and then it goes on to say, quote, once again, only by making the U.S. have a taste of its own medicine can we touch the nerves of the U.S. and its allies and reshape the Western world's understanding of U.S. bullying in the South China Sea. So, should the United States State Department see this as a direct threat from China? And if so, then we have to ask the question, right? What would be the proper response? So we're going to ask this question of a former naval intelligence officer, John Jordan, for his take here with this news, this reaction, this threat, really, if you will, right? On the News with Rick Sanchez, where we believe, by golly, it's time to do news again. All right, so here's the list of the questions that we think will come to mind for you as you watch this newscast unfold tonight. And obviously the first one is Chinese military off the coast of the U.S. bluff? Or is that a real threat? Are ransomware hacks of our institutions even bigger than we thought? And do police have the right to collect your social media footprint during, let's say, a routine stop? Really? All right, we begin tonight not only with the apparent threat from China, but also with a boastful and official announcement from Iran, celebrating the, quote, greatest historical military event, they call it. Statement is referring to a voyage by the Iranian naval fleet, who for the first time ever sailed into the Atlantic as an obvious show of force directed at the United States. RT's Ben Swan files this report.
Well, Rick, the most obvious question in all of this is what has made China so angry this time? Well, the answer to that is a U.S. Navy destroyer passing within 12 miles of an artificial Chinese island in the South China Sea. China has referred to this action by the United States as a naked provocation. Central Foreign Affairs Commission Director Yang Jiechi, only by making the U.S. have a taste of its own medicine can we touch the nerves of the U.S. and its allies and reshape the Western world's understanding of U.S. bullying in the South China Sea. The U.S. has long insisted that it has the right to transit and can operate freely throughout the South China Sea. But now the push is to give the U.S. an exact response, for China to send warships within 12 miles of U.S. bases, as well as U.S. allies, which, if we're being candid, would likely be viewed as an act of war. But it isn't China alone that is pushing back against the U.S. On Tuesday, the commander of the Iranian Navy praised his country's sailors for what he described as the, quote, greatest historical military event in the maritime field, end quote, referring to the return of the 75th Naval Fleet after sailing the Atlantic for the first time. The fleet, consisting of a Navy destroyer and a logistics support ship, traveled across two oceans, the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic, traveling 28,000 nautical miles. The senior official claimed that the mission had demonstrated Iran's confidence on the world stage, but stressed that his nation invited all regional partners to join in on peace and friendship. So what does all of this mean? Well, after nothing short of a failed war in Afghanistan over the past 20 years, and then, of course, a disastrous exit from that country, other nations around the world may be looking to test just how strong and how powerful the U.S. military actually is. For the news with Rick Sanchez, I'm Ben Swan.
I promised you John Jordan. Here he is, live and in the flesh, as they say. John, what do you do if you're the Pentagon or the State Department and you hear these two countries, one making what seems to me like a threat, you tell us, you're the expert, and the other saying we've already gone into the Atlantic and we're starting military exercises?
Well, let's take them in sequence. First of all, the Pentagon and the State Department will look at this and say, absolutely fine. If you want to come into the Atlantic, it's international waters. You're free to transit the water between the U.S. and the Bahamas, between the U.S. and Florida, between the Florida coast. And Cuba, for example, is international waters. Countries do this all the time. This illustrates kind of how either how badly they misunderstand us and they think that this is going to rankle the administration or the Pentagon or the State Department. It won't. Or this is for Chinese and Iranian domestic consumption. I mean, if the Chinese want to drag a couple of frigates across the U.S. coast, or the Iranians want to, they can do so. They're not a threat to any U.S. base or U.S. interests. They're not able to threaten the sea lanes of communications or the trade routes. They're be able to support a couple of ships for a few days in the Atlantic. That's fine. So I think the smart move for the U.S. here, and this is what they will do, and I know how the Pentagon will view this, they'll just ignore it.
Is this, as the Chinese seem to be implying today, a taste of the United States' own medicine?
Well, no. I mean, first of all, the Chinese, there's two parts of this. There's the military part and the political part.
Right.
The military part, the Chinese aren't able to sustain a force in the Atlantic large enough, or the composition of which is able to threaten U.S. interests, certainly in the Atlantic, and not able to threaten the trade routes or U.S. bases or anything like that. So this is just for show. Secondly, they call it U.S. bullying in the South China Sea. Well, the U.S. is working with our allies, Australia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Japan, all of whom are democratic countries and all of whom want us there. So it's not bullying when we are working with our allies in international waters, doing freedom of navigation exercises, no different from what the Chinese and the Iranians are proposing in the Atlantic. So fine, there's room for everybody.
They see it as bullying, though, because of the military exercises specifically, and I think, as somebody who watches this, but clearly is not an expert, is what the United States is doing in Taiwan, where we've actually been on the ground doing military exercises, selling them all kinds of heavy machinery and military equipment. Do you think that's where they may have a point, or is that what rankles them the most, you think?
Well, there's two parts of this. First of all, Rick, no one who's bullying actually admits to being the bully. Everybody, when the bullies want to blame everybody else. So it's kind of like in football, you use offensive lineman, defensive lineman. When there's a false start, everybody's pointing fingers at each other, hoping it'll shape the refs' perceptions of the game. That's what this is. But the big difference here, Rick, is that the Chinese have threatened to invade Taiwan, and the Taiwanese have made no such threat against China, nor is Taiwan able to even pose a military threat to mainland China whatsoever. So it's clear that the Taiwanese are on defense here. It is a democratic country, freely elected government, and they're the ones that are being threatened. And when they do land exercises, those are clearly defensive in nature, because Taiwan has expressed none, nor do they have any capacity to threaten mainland China at all. So it's kind of transparent what Beijing is doing here.